Wishing you a very, very happy new year. Good morning. Good morning. Sorry for yesterday. There was a very unforeseen glitch, so we could not start the class. Let's finish civil services today, fair and square. So, we're discussing civil services, and we've understood that it's to be done in three pillars: the structure, the role, and the values. We finished the structure and we also did a little bit of context to civil services. Now let's spend some time on the role of civil services. Having said that, if you'd like some more background information on civil services, if you'd like some more historical context to civil services, though it's not necessarily important for your exam, you can refer to the MCF1 lectures that have done civil services in more historical detail. But as far as the mains exam is concerned, these are the three pillars that we should largely be looking at. Now, let us start with what is called the role of civil services. Now, when we're answering the role of civil services, we should largely be answering three simple questions. One is, what is the role of the civil services and how is it evolving? Two, what is stopping the civil services from being able to adapt to this evolving role? And three, how can we solve this issue and how can we make the civil services more contemporarily valid, more contemporarily prepared, right? And we should answer this with as many examples, with as many case studies as possible. So let us start. So when we look at the role of civil services, there is a core role of civil services. Now, we understand that the civil services are the administrative apparatus which translate political vision into action and are the force behind sustaining democratic governance in India. There are two very important phrases that I've used here. One is the setup that translates political vision, and two, the setup that sustains democratic governance in India, despite not being democratically placed. Now, so what is the core role? The first core role is, in fact, that of democratic governance. We've seen this being asked in the previous year questions also. So, what is the role of the civil services when it comes to the aspect of democratic governance? First, they ensure what is called continuity of governance in the real sense of it all. While studying polity, we would have often seen some offices to exhibit features which say that, there's continuity of office. Like the Lok Sabha speaker continues to be the Lok Sabha speaker until the new Lok Sabha sworn in and a pro tem speaker is elected. Same is the case with the vice president. Same is the case with the president, right? So they demonstrate some continuity of office so that there are some actions that can always be taken. The same principle, but in a more practical, in a more pragmatic sense, will apply to continuity of governance and civil services. Because they are the permanent executive, they're able to ensure there is such continuity. Second, with respect to policy, they perform an advisory function. They perform a translation function, which is converting policy decisions or legislative decisions into administrative, action, into administrative reality. And third, it is them who on ground will uphold the rule of law and the larger principles of constitutional morality. So you have to take this role as diversely as possible. And practically speaking, they would therefore manage some very key democratic functions like conducting of elections. If we cut through the chase and we really call a spade, if we look at it the way it is, practically it is the bureaucracy that runs the system of elections in the country. It is the election commission and the entire machinery deployed by the election commission, including all sorts of personnel across all sorts of roles, who would effectively be conducting, good elections. So here, when we recycle the same example that we did in electoral reforms, you would be aware of T.N. Session, who had introduced certain key reforms and significantly strengthened administration in the 1990s. So the way he started implementing electoral functioning, it significantly reduced money power politics, and it also reduced what is called your electoral malpractice, something which is very important in democracy. So how do we write an answer on democratic governance? We look at the key functions of democracy, we look at the key features of democracy, and we see how the civil services is performing such functions. Correct? So one of the functions of democracy is legislation. So legislation has to be translated into administrative action, which is largely to be conducted by the civil services. Good. And sometimes they're also a part of special committees who can suggest certain reforms that the elected executive can then put into practice. Okay? Now, this is largely what the role of the civil services is from a democratic governance point of view. Second, what is the exact role of the civil services in economic growth? Primarily two things which are sort of carved out from the larger role. One, they are the ones who are implementing economic policy. Let's take a simple example. The government legislates GST. The government brings in GST 2.0 in a manner of speaking. At the end of the day, it will all depend on what your GST collection is, which will depend on who your GST collectors are, who your GST related revenue officers are. So the success of the GST regime will depend on how it is actually being implemented on ground. How robust is the tech system behind GST, which is your GSTN portal? How compliant and how upright are the officers who are looking at GST evaluations, right? So when you look at economic policy, any major feature of it has to be implemented by the bureaucracy. Now, in an economy where there's basically a regulation, you basically have to ensure fair play, fair competition. You have to ensure that the citizens or the consumers are also protected. but also at the same time, there are enough opportunities that are given for businesses to honestly grow and grow within the realms of the law. You would require regulators. So, your regulatory frameworks are technically managed by the bureaucracy. Take most of your regulators. We are going to be discussing regulatory governance in some time. Take most of your regulators. SEBI, you look at TRI, you look at IRDA, your insurance Regulatory Development Authority, your National Financial Authority. Look at any of these major regulators. They're all generally manned by the bureaucracy, they're generally composed of the bureaucracy. So these regulatory frameworks will help you drive your growth engines. Third, one of the features of our economy is that we're welfare driven. So, on ground, how welfare schemes are implemented, from identification of beneficiaries to ensuring that the benefits reach them on time, to ensuring that the right eligible beneficiaries and the right benefits are able to meet each other, is in fact a very important feature of our economy. And therefore, ultimately, they are the interface between the citizens and the states. So, whether it's resource allocation, in terms of allocating tenders or allocating land or allocating opportunities, whether it is a simple function of licensing, right? You would require licenses to carry on certain economic activities, to say tax collection, to larger infrastructure planning. Now, for example, highways have to be built, roads have to be constructed. Now, highways and roads are not just connectivity mechanisms, they are also to be engines of growth. Better highway systems have a direct correlation with better commerce in a country. If parts of our country have better connected highways, then transportation trucks can reach different parts of the country in a smoother and a faster manner. So the planning and the ideation of it has to be effectively done by the bureaucracy. And as you said, a larger facilitation of business. So the Indian bureaucracy today must support a globalized, a digital, and very effective economy where your institutional frameworks, your institutional performances merge with economic performances. And World Bank has done some research on this, and their outcome is countries with strong bureaucratic quality will often see higher GDP growth rates. These are simple governance indicators in the World Bank. Okay. Now, for example, uh, in Kerala, I was looking at an example here. Operation Suleimani. This was used, and it was so successful because it used bureaucratic facilitation to ensure public nutrition and food security. And this was done by improving social welfare outcomes and public private citizen sort of a cooperation. Clear on this? So, the bureaucracy, your food stock agencies, and people at the end were all able to put it together. Bhumi, I'll let you know by the end of today. Okay? Clear? The third rule is Socio-cultural reform and inclusion. Just you just drop me a mail and mark it up as urgent, and we'll get to it today itself. Now, how do we do that? Again, a subset of what we're discussing. You implement and operationalize policies which are based on inclusion, right? So, for example, one nation, one ration card, to tribal welfare boards, right? All of these are inclusion driven policies. Tomorrow, if you've decided to have a jam trinity, a Jandan account, an Aadhaar, and a mobile, so enrollments in Aadhaar and activation of Jandan accounts, ultimately on ground is the bureaucracy's headache. Unless they don't solve it properly and they don't solve it on ground well, then more people will not have access to these facilities, right? And civil servants are generally first responders in crisis, whether it is an earthquake or it is, a hurricane or a public health emergency or anything. So the larger aspect of social resilience, that larger aspect of social resilience is best translated through the civil services. Are we clear on this? Do we understand this? Yes, 100%. Good. Now, if X is my role, then how is this X role evolving? So traditionally, I'm supposed to do this. Contemporary or an evolving role is supposed to be a Y, and it is to be understood on certain themes, on certain dimensions. So let us say, okay, Nish, policy. Now, the traditional role of the civil services is to quietly and put their head down and implement political decisions. Today, the civil services co-designs policy, backs with data, backs with evidence. If you look at the larger role in economy, they had mostly a regulatory role where you were supposed to control and manage the markets. Today, you're supposed to enable businesses, your investment summit, single window clearance, you know, to facilitate markets. A significant change today is with respect to service delivery, where your job originally was to distribute whatever services the government is supposed to provide to the citizens. But today, you are supposed to implement a digital service delivery ecosystem. You are supposed to focus on user governance, society where welfare administration was your primary job. Today, you are to be a part of inclusive governance through RTI, through citizens grievance redressal portals, basically empower citizens to hold the system accountable from a technological dimension or a theme. Traditionally, a lot of the decisions were manual. Today, most of them are data driven. We are using GIS tools, especially in agriculture, to mark hotspots. We are using AI to deliver some very important decisions in the government. Correct? So, a small table like this, where very clearly you're able to show that kind of a correlation, is all that is required. Correct? So, civil services, therefore, are effectively acting as regulators, facilitators, as partners in governance, and not just in governance, but also equally partners in development, where historically their role was traditionally custodial. Their job was to just effectively maintain what is called status quo, run things the way they are. On the contemporary flag point, today, their job is more collaborative, right? And if you look at some of the leading bureaucracies of the world, where we take examples from, and one of the reasons why a lot of you in your training would be visiting these countries, let's say one is Singapore, is where a highly meritocratic, highly disciplined civil service, which balances regulatory enforcement, implements economic policy very, very effectively. Singaporean bureaucracy is one of the top ranked in the world. They pay their bureaucrats well. They expect a certain decent amount of work from them. They are given the freedom to be able to do what they're supposed to do by the law, which ultimately leads to lesser corruption. Better bureaucracy will lead to lesser corruption. A simple correlation that has to be applied everywhere we understand the role of the civil services. Another example that you can generally look at is Canada. Canada undertook a massive civil services reform between 1989 to 1993 called the Public Service Code 2000. It basically decentralized the civil services. It removed red tape to a very large extent, and it gave the Canadian civil services a more adaptive role, a more understandable role in public service. Now, so if today's rule is this, then the question is, why is there a gap? It shouldn't be the case. So, to understand this, the larger question of why there are gaps like this can be answered through certain simple problems. First, the civil services is dominantly based on a generalist model. You're trained as generalists, you're rotated across sectors. You will generally lack deep domain knowledge in very technical areas like public health, like data governance, like climate policy. Let's take an example of, let us say, health. We will be discussing health in social sectors, in social justice. There is a dimension in health called public health. Public health today has grown into a formal, proper academic discipline. People are undertaking masters in public health also. What is public health? Public health is effectively solving mass health problems with governmental intervention at scale. Let us say, for example, oral cancer or oral hygiene is a problem in our country. It will have so many dimensions. One of it is a medical dimension, that how do we make people more aware of, the ill effects consumption of tobacco in any form can have on your health. Then would be availability of treatment facilities. Then also you would have to look at how can we price tobacco products to create a deterrence. How can we regulate the selling of tobacco products to create a certain wall? Isn't that the case? So public health is no longer just about core health. Public health today includes health economics, includes health statistics, includes health in the law, health and population studies. There is so much that goes into it. Now, do you necessarily expect the Secretary of Health at a state government level in India to understand all of this? Through experience, through general reading a little bit, but not with the kind of expertise that you would require the health secretary to have. And this kind of limitation is built into the way bureaucracy is built. Now, this is effectively a generalist versus, a specialist debate. The answer is that we nowadays require specialized journalists, and I'm going to come to that in a bit. But why does this debate largely come from? Why are we even looking at it? It's because the role has fundamentally changed. And the role has changed to a point that we can't imagine. If you think about it, people who are recruited in the revenue services and the audit and account services are effectively trained in taxation and audit for 2 years, while it takes a private person about 5 years to be specialized as a chartered accountant in the country. Correct? So, this is generally the difference between it all, rightfully so. Now, what is the difference? A generalist would be somebody who would have a generic or a diverse degree, would be appointed to a post which does not require technical qualification, would be somebody who's a jack of all trades and a master of none, would look at problems from a broader perspective because you are not just committed to one specialized aspect of the problem. A specialist would be somebody who would possess a technical degree, a single discipline degree, would generally be appointed to a post where certain professional requirements or some some kind of specialized training is required, knows more about less and less, and is generally understood to have a tunnel vision about this is the problem. Now, through this point, we will discuss the generalist versus specialist debate. The In the Indian bureaucracy, the officers of the IAS are generally considered to be generalists. Simple as that. Technically, the only generalist service we have is the administrative service. Every other service has a very special role to play. Isn't that the case? So, specialist services like the police, the foreign service, the revenue service, the audit and account service, telecom, whatever they might be. They are specialist services. Over and above this, you will have a separate set of services which are being recruited through a technical exam. In India, a generalist exam is recruiting for generalist and specialist services, and a specialist exam is also recruiting for specialist services. Look at it this way. The civil services exam is a generalist exam, but it is recruiting for generalists and specialists both. Whereas the engineering services exam is a specialist exam, which is also recruiting for specialists, right? Railway service, military engineering service, those aspects. Just 1 second, please. So you will have generalist services and technical services, both being recruited through multiple sets of exams. Okay? Dheeraj, I'll keep that in mind. Okay? You would have also heard of a UPSC exam called Combined Medical Health Services, where you have central health services which are also recruited. Right? Good. Now, it is the generalist and the specialist debate is a fierce controversy in our Indian administrative setup. In fact, it has developed as the naughtiest. And naughtiest is KNOTTIEST. It has become one of the most severe internal problems in our country's civil services. Let's understand why. One of the primary reasons why there is a generalist and a specialist debate is because the specialists have a problem with how the generalists are doing specialized jobs. Why is the head of the railway board or the railway secretary in the country not from the railway services? Why is the CAG not from the auditing services? If a generalist can have a specialist understanding, a specialist can also have a generalist understanding. Why are you assuming only one half of it is true? The reason why our civil services has largely been generalist is simply because it is a legacy of the British administration. Nothing more. Under the colonial rule, the selection to the earlier called Indian Civil Services, ICS, this was done on the basis of a competitive exam, mostly held in London, and it had more importance to liberal education like linguistics or like classics education. अब सिविल सर्विसेज अपने हिसाब से रिक्रूट कर रहे हैं लंदन के हिसाब से, तो उनका जो उनका एम्फोसिस है वो वहां रहेगा. सो ये जो रिक्रूटमेंट प्रोसेस था, दिस रिक्रूटमेंट प्रोसेस therefore encouraged an amateur administrator who would be able to look at the larger perspective as a whole and not get into the technical details. And a liberal education or a classics education or a arts education allows you to have a larger perspective, because a specialist would always look at a specific scientific inquiry. Liberal education does not mean education about liberal ideas. Liberal education means education which is not technical in nature. Okay? Do we understand this? So, technically, if you study English, it's not, it's liberal education. Does not necessarily mean it's education about liberal ideas. Okay. Nonetheless. So, this system was then transported and evolved and therefore interpreted in India. The successor of the Indian civil services in India is called the Indian Administrative Service, which is basically a generalist cadre of civil servants. It is these officers who will end up occupying the most sought after administrative positions in the central and the state secretariats. They are the ones who will enjoy positions which are the closest in terms of being in contact with the political executive. It could be the prime minister and the cabinet at the central level. It could be the chief minister and the cabinet at the state level. You are therefore directly associated with the formulation and therefore the arrival of the most important decisions and policies that will shape the pattern of governance in the country. We all agree on this? The reason the IS shapes the policy of this country or has a very strong role in shaping the policy of the country is because they are the ones who are in charge of posts responsible for the implementation and the coordination of policies. If your secretariats are going to mostly have IS officers, then policies are largely going to be determined by those who are in the secretariat. And this is why it has given a certain sense of elitism to an essentially generalist service. And it has therefore left a lot of technically qualified and very, very competent officers to feel demotivated, to be demoralized. Because in the way the departments are hierarchically structured, the IS is largely going to be sitting at the top. And these specialists will work in their specialist areas and they will man these departments or these posts. They will give technical advice to generalist administrators right from the top. The technical administrators are going to give general administrators technical advice on how to run things from the top. Do we understand the dichotomy? Good. They can be chief engineer, director of medical education, chief conservator of forests. But ultimately, they're not the ones deciding larger policy. Clear? Because defense, health and family welfare, communication, petroleum, Ministry of Water Resources, everything is largely headed by generalist IS officers. And this is why there has become a friction between the generalists and the specialists. Now, having said that, is there some advantage to the generalist model? There must be some reason why it must be working. So, if you go back to Lord Macaulay, 1854, it states that a person generally with liberal education and a multifunctional experience is much better than a person who has specialized experience in a very narrow field. I'll completely pull us out of this and just take Manmohan Singh sir's example. Was Manmohan Singh Saab an extraordinary economist? Yes. Do we need the Prime Minister to be a better economist or a better statesperson? We would rather have a better statesperson as a Prime Minister than an economist, because when you are the Prime Minister of the country, your job is to make informed decisions, to able to look at the crux of affairs and effectively then take decisions based on what is being offered to you, right? That's largely what we're supposed to do. The same case applies here also. If a person who has been an agriculturalist was supposed to design MG Narega or VGG Ramji versus a person who's a generalist administrator who's seen the intersection of poverty, unemployment, women, ruralization, agriculture put together, the outcome is going to be very different. Because MG Narega is not just about ruralization. It's about rural, it's about unemployment, it's about poverty, it's also about women, it's also about skill, it's also about center state financing. So there is a certain case to be made as to why sometimes generalist officers would make sense. The second reason as to why you would think so is administration in India is organized on an area basis, right? And it requires a generalist administrator to coordinate the activities of various departments. Let's take the case of the collector. The district collector today has technically no collecting function now. The only thing that is collected at the district level today is the stamp duty, which is a negligible source of state revenue also. So, though we use the word collector here and there is really no collecting function that's happening. What is actually happening is a magisterial function. So, the district magistrate or the district collector, let's take the office. Remember this is important. Tomorrow, if there is a flood in your district, you will coordinate the police, the health department, electricity, water, food, essential supplies, education, hospitals, disaster management, communication channels. And I could just think of 10 things at the drop of a hat. Correct? If you were a certified disaster specialist, you would only be looking at the larger disaster component of it. Or there would be an inherent, if not conscious, a subconscious bias to let me solve the disaster problem. Right? So, in what proportion do all of these 10 aspects have to be managed? Is when you are generally aware of everything. Now, what happens in India is till the 60s, 70s, early 80s, people with mostly art degrees ended up in the civil services. Nearing liberalization, nearing LPG, which suddenly gave a boost to technical degrees. So late 70s, 80s, 90s, especially in the 90s, you start seeing a greater entry of technocrats in general bureaucracy, which today is basically we saying that most people who are clearing the civil services are engineers. That's not because engineers are collectively smarter than other graduates. That's not necessarily the case. What is the actual issue is people who are generally smart have picked up engineering in their career choices. So there is a larger pool. It's like saying IITs don't make kids smart. Smart kids go to IIT and that's what makes IIT sought after. If the most hardworking kids in the country end up studying engineering, most people who crack the CAT exam are going to be engineers. Most people who crack the civil services are going to be engineers. That does not mean there are not hardworking and smart people in other academic disciplines. It is so that the population is figured that way. So if you are smart and hardworking in your own domain, you will still have an equally good chance. The problem is not which discipline you come from. The problem is who are you competing with as a whole. So today you are seeing a lot of engineers in generalist cadres, which is why you will see every other district will have an app of its own. All of these and you'll see a lot of these new officers. Every time they will have an app. They'll go to town with the app. So generally by education, training and experience, generalists are supposed to have a larger view of the problem. And they are generally called upon to do the larger issues of problem solving, mediation, a sort of a coordination function between departments. In fact, and you can use this quote in your answers, the second ARC calls the IAS the General Management Service. General Management Services are those which require its members to serve in a large variety of sectors and discharge a general management function in field postings. So, district collectors, divisional railway managers, divisional commissioners, postmasters general, they're supposed to carry out a very large number of functions. And they do not need any specialized knowledge of a sector, but have a very significant role in the overall management of everything put together at their level. And that is why members of these services are drawn from a variety of backgrounds. This could be technical, non-technical, it is okay. But after being recruited, they're all made to undergo the same post-recruitment training. Whether you're an engineer, doctor, or a lawyer, or a accountant entering the civil services, historian, economist, whatever, you will undergo the same training irrespective of what your educational background is. The recruitment process does not test any technical knowledge per se. Then the other reason why generalists are so strongly preferred is that administration and practice is very complex and complicated. You require a higher degree of managerial skills for planning, directing, coordinating, whether it's man or material or goods or services. And these techniques of management can be learned by both practical experience and training experience. So I do not necessarily need somebody who's technically qualified. I can train everybody to do this job. Right? That is why the first-hand field experience that you will ex- see in your lives is when you're a subdivisional magistrate. If you then look at it from a parliamentary democracy point of view, point number five, shall I just headline the points for you? First, historically, the point about liberal education. Two, the way our administration is organized. It is generally organized on an area basis. We discuss this. Third, how the IAS is basically a general management service. Fourth, administration in general is complex and complicated and requires the same post recruitment training irrespective of backgrounds. Fifth, in a parliamentary democracy, ministers will require generalists to advise in policy matters because as they themselves are responsible to the parliament and they have to work for the party. So in the process of policy formulation and later in the execution of it, the specialists will play an important role. But the policy cannot be made successful just by making it technically sound. It has to be financially, legally, politically, administratively, democratically, it has to be feasible. Yes or no? A generalist, by the virtue of your varied experience in your years of service in the IAS, before you take up secretary level positions, you would have worked in so many diverse departments that your bird's eye view is simply going to be phenomenal. It is simply going to be phenomenal. No, no, no. Parliamentary secretaries, we've discussed this is an office of profit problem. Okay. Abhinandan, again, this is not the way you disrupt. Wait for me to finish. And parliamentary secretaries are, it's an office of profit issue. थोड़ा सा ध्यान रखो ना. These are basics. So a generalist effectively becomes a link between the specialist and the amateur minister at the top. If you think about it, the minister is always going to be amateur. You require a generalist here and you require a specialist here, and that is how the trio becomes complete. Right? And if you look at all feasibilities, technical is just one part. But the political, the financial, the legal repercussions of it collectively will have a larger role to play. Yes. And it is generally viewed that in administration, very little technical knowledge is required. Now, there are equally points to be made for specialists. Globalization has effectively changed the game on its head. Technological improvements need to also be reflected in bureaucracy. With IT and the revolution that the IT sector has undergone, work that we're doing with telecom, with computing devices, with networking technologies, you name it, you have to be digitally based. You require a centralized system with different departments connected by a network with supporting management functions like decision making, organizing, planning, controlling, coordination, all of those things, and make the future office a paperless office. Today, when we discuss, say, for example, JAM, we've heard of something called the Public Finance Management System. Basically, how disbursements are made. If subsidy has to be put into somebody's accounts, how do we make sure that happens? Right? Clear on this? So you require better management controls. You require instant information. And specifically with our LPG reforms since 1990s, market forces have been given greater autonomy. So the need for technocrats has also therefore become important. And all of this leads to the larger reason why you require some super specialists. Yes. The environment secretary must understand environment change and climate funding and everything all else put together. So today you need a very harmonious collaboration between the generalists and the specialists, right? We should encourage specialization in economic administration, industrial administration, agriculture and rural development administration, social and educational administration, personal administration, financial administration, defense and security administration, planning in the larger federal administration. So the first ARC actually recommended that civil services should be divided into two categories. First, post in the fields and post in the headquarters. The field posts are to be held by functional services. Functional services, which not only includes engineering services, but also services like tax. And the only service which was not functional but occupied most of the higher positions in civil service was the IS. So the first ARC recommended that the IS should be converted into a functional service, and then specialization can be brought in. Clear? So do we understand this? Yes or no? Good. So field HQ, field should have functional services, and reforms are required in the middle and the senior management roles of the civil services. Above a certain level, let us say joint secretary level and above, all posts should be manned by people coming from different sectors and services, from industry, from services, from corporate, from NGOs, basically lateral entry. The first aim of the ARC was to specialize some generalists and to generalize some specialists. To specialize some generalists and to generalize some specialists. Are we okay with this? Yes or no? Good. So you can quote first ARC here. Second, a specialized planning group of Group A services in 1993 recommended domain-based services, that officers should eventually be put into larger domains: agriculture, social sector, culture, natural resources, energy, industry, so on and so forth. An officer should be given a maximum of three domains in their entire career. So that if the same thing, it's a very interesting answer. If you think about it, if you are at the joint secretary level and we rotate you between industry, finance, and environment, that's a very good combination to have. If you're just rotating between industry, finance, and environment, you are generalist and specialist enough, right? Good. In 2008, the HOTA committee recommended that such kind of a domain assignment should be allocated as soon as possible. HOTA committee also recommended changes to the exam recruitment cycle also, but yes, this is largely how it should be done. Are we clear on this? Yes. So one of the reasons, of course, is the generalist rigidity. Second is your general ethics answers. Political interference, which would mean arbitrary transfers, frequent transfers, um, compromise on autonomy, punishment and reward mechanisms. Then you would see issues such as how the culture itself is resistant to change. The bureaucracy itself is resistant to change. Very hierarchical, very procedurally rigid, rule over results. It's okay if innovation can be slowed down. It's okay if responsiveness can be slowed down. But what has been cast as a rule has been set in stone. The lack of modern tools and skills. Correct or not? So, generalist versus specialists, political interference, cultural hurdles, modern tools are structural problems. Can we say so? Yes. Then there are some accountability and reward problems per se. We do not really have a good way to check how well a bureaucrat is performing. And it takes away so much. It takes away public trust. There is no clear mechanism to judge performance. So now we talk about 360-degree review, peer to peer review, just name drops in your answers. There is no public accountability per se. There are no parliamentary committees entrusted with the task of reviewing the performances of civil servants, their key postings, etc. Take the case of Malaysia, very, very large civil service with very low accountability, very limited reforms. It has created structural inefficiency. Canada, the exact opposite. Post civil services reform becomes all the more flexible, becomes all the more efficient, very restructured, precise civil services. Are we clear on this? So, what do? We introduce domain specialization. We encourage lateral entry. We look at a fixed tenure, right? So that there is stability. We look at better performance reviews. We look at citizen feedback. We should be implementing Mission Karm Yogi. We've heard of it. Mission Karm Yogi is nothing but changing the orientation of the civil services, which is digital governance, civil services values, data analytics, yes, capacity building, yes. From a, so this is basically like a quote, from rule based to role based. Create innovation hubs within the ecosystem, have better digital public infrastructure, train civil servants to integrate AI, machine learning, big data policy changes, big data and policy changes, everything. For example, GIS mapping in aspirational districts is a fantastic way to account for real development. And interoperability. Crime department should be able to look at vehicular data so that they can track better whistleblower protection, and an updated value code for civil services. Works good? Yes or no? Okay. So this is how it has to be done. Good to go? Make sense? Excellent. Values I'll merge with ethics, so should not be a problem. Let's do anti-corruption. Lateral entry bypasses credible selection process done by constitutional body led threat to IS. How can this be overcome? Lateral entry is not to be done for each and every position. Two, lateral entry is not bypassing the UPSC. Lateral entry can coexist. You can still have UPSC interviews for lateral entrance directly. And three, we've been doing lateral entry for a very long time. All right, let's do anti-corruption tomorrow. You can say so. मैं चेक करता हूँ. See you. Bye.